Hey guys, welcome to part 2 of Advanced Fading in GPPs. I want to talk about two things in this video that will help you perfect the art of fading DFS baseball. The first thing is, I forgot a key part of predicting high ownership players that I want to add to my 4 factors that I told you about in my previous video. Second thing is, I want to explain how to properly leverage a fade to maximize your profitability when the fade is successful. So first, let's just review how to find a high ownership player we want to fade. First thing is we want to look at the positions that have a lot of scarcity where the hitters aren't that good. And that's usually the catcher position, the second base position, and the shortstop position. You're usually going to have only a few players you can really choose from at these positions, and it makes it so low quality plays get absurdly high ownership and incorrectly high ownership. So the second thing is we want to locate hitters that DFSers are going to like and therefore target these hitters. So DFSers like to play hitters who are top 5 in the batting order. For example, guys are going to like to play a guy like Evan Longoria, but probably not a guy like Steven Souza who's batting 7th. But he probably would have very low ownership. So second thing is DFSers love to play hitters who are facing the opposite pitching hand. So for example, players would really like to play Manny Machado against Drew Smyly because Smyly's a lefty and Machado's a righty, but they're not going to play a guy like Chris Davis against Smyly because it's a left-on-left matchup. And then the last thing is DFSers like to play hitters whose team has high run projection. So for example, they might not want to play anyone on the Twins because their run projection is so low, but they're definitely going to want to play guys who are on the Rockies or Padres with such a massively, massively high run projection. So the last factor I want to add is DFSers, especially early in the season when there's a lot more recreational players, love to play hitters who are hot. And with that said, there's a really, really clear fade today who falls under all these categories, and that's Trevor Story. His team has a really high run projection at 6.1 runs. He's a righty who's facing a lefty, which is perfect. And he's batting number 2 in the order. And he's also been absolutely hotter than the freaking sun right now. I think he's had, just an absurd amount of fantasy points in the last several games. It's going to go to my DraftKings page, but it's fine. If you're following baseball, you know Story. I think he has 6 home runs in his first 4 games. He's on pace for like 200 homers. He's hotter than the sun right now. So I'm just going to, as an aside, say I think this is actually a particularly good fade because Story actually isn't very good. Before the season, Steamer had him projected at about a 730 OPS, which is actually really bad at Coors Field. And even if you don't believe Steamer's projections, which I think would be wrong because they're better than projecting players than you or me ever will be, he has some pretty troubling stats. One is that his home run per fly ball rate is 54.5%. It's usually around 11% for an average hitter, and he probably wouldn't be an exception. So he's obviously running absurdly hot in that department. He also has 0 walks and a pretty high K rate. He just doesn't, it just is very clear that he's getting very lucky. So with that said, he's going to be very highly owned. He's not great. I really do think he's a fade. And if you disagree with me, fine, you can play him. I might get burned, I might not. I think it just is by far the best play when we're talking about GPPs. And especially on FanDuel, where I actually really feel like he's not the best points per dollar player. But so the question is now, if we choose to fade Story, how are we going to leverage an outcome where he does horribly as much as possible? So the first thing we want to do is to leverage it is we want to avoid players who are around Story in the lineup. So for example, if the lineup was theoretically this, which I don't think it will be, my guess is LeMahieu will be batting leadoff, but let's just pretend for the sake of argument it is. We're going to want to avoid players like Blackman and Gonzalez because their performance is correlated to Story, and if Story does poorly, it makes it less likely they're going to do well. So basically, we're just going to knock all these players off our list. So one thing we can do, though, is if you really like the Rockies, you can stack players who are away from him in the order. So instead of doing a 1, 2, 3 stack, you can do a 5, 6, 7 stack with Parra, and again, this probably actually will not be the lineup, but you could do a Parra, Paulson, Hundley lineup instead of Blackman, Story, Gonzalez. And that means you can take advantage of the Rockies playing at Coors Field, which is a great hitter's park, and also take advantage of a Story fade. Another thing we can do to leverage it is use a hitter that's at the same position but at a totally different price point. So, for example, if you found a hitter who's really cheap, like in the 2.6K range, or if the hitter's really expensive, who's in the $5,000 range, it would be great as a faded Story, because if you drastically change the price of a hitter, it's going to have a butterfly effect and change your lineups as a whole. Maybe you now can afford a different pitcher, or you have to use a cheaper pitcher. You have to use cheaper hitters, or you can afford a high-priced hitter that you wouldn't have used before. So it actually can drastically change your lineup. So one guy who fits this mold is Carlos Correa, who's at 5.1K. It's obviously a really awesome hitter, might be MVP this year. And he also fits another way to leverage, which is just basically finding the highest upside possible player to play instead. Because if we find a really high upside player, you inflict maximum pain on the Story owners who maybe have a 0 and your guy has maybe 20, 30 points. So a guy like Correa fits that mold as well. And looking at guys maybe Brad Miller, who is actually a hitter who has quite a bit of power and is facing a high home run allowed guy in Mike Wright, he might be a solid play as well. And he actually fits my last key to leveraging, which is if you find high upside players at the bottom order, you're now maximizing by using a guy who's probably going to be really low owned, which is going to be great for you. So basically a guy like Brad Miller is actually perfect. He's batting 6th, which is over that fictional line, and means players who are just not really going to want to play him. And he actually has great power and is pretty cheap. So I think he actually is a great play instead of Story. And then another one, which is just an obvious one to me, is Alexi Ramirez, who's going to be criminally low owned, and is actually probably close to as good of a hitter as Story when we're talking about fantasy points. He's batting 7th, so people are going to want to use him. But if you use a guy like him and then leverage with a stack around him like Norris and Solarte, man, you could really take advantage of Story having a bad game and really not be sacrificing that much at all. So thanks for watching this video. In conclusion, if we fade a player, it's a little scary, but if we leverage it correctly, it can be really profitable. So again, thanks for watching this video. If you like it, please subscribe. Click the subscribe button below, and I'm going to be coming out with more and more videos throughout the week. So thank you so much for watching, and good luck today.